Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descendant life forms are so amazingly primitive that two of them still think doing a podcast called Digital Watches are a pretty neat idea is a pretty neat idea. These podcasters have, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Actually, this is the solution.
Hey, Bryan, what the was this? And who thought it was a good idea?
Oh, man. Well, Jeff, this is our discussion of the long, dark tea time of the soul.
Yes, it is. And I think we're going to do similar to what we did for the last Dirk Gently book, which is I'm just going to summarize every chapter. So whether you've read it or not, you're going to have a really good idea of what was written, not necessarily what happens.
No, exactly. This is an interesting story, Jeff, and I wasn't really surprised by your reaction to it there.
Okay, good.
It certainly isn't the in-depth treatise that the last one was.
No.
And as it turns out, I remember commenting to you either before we started the podcast last time or at some point during last podcast that I had tons and tons of notes. This one is far more plot driven, and I have very, very, very few notes.
Okay.
So we're going to listen to your mellifluous voice.
Okay, yeah.
Some time now.
So, chapter 1. So, the book starts out, and we are going to meet Kate Schechter. And she has lived all over the world, but she considers herself a New Yorker.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after getting married, she lost her husband in a taxi-hailing accident. And since that time, she has had a succession of self-absorbed men, which has left her emotionally vacant. She is currently traveling by plane to Norway to meet the current self-absorbed man in her life, Jean-Philippe.
Or planning to travel, anyway.
Yes. Well, she has little hope of actually meeting him since he is frequently called away on business at the last minute.
Mm-hmm.
After finally arriving at the check-in desk, there is a large Nordic customer in front of her arguing with the check-in girl that they say she does not want to think about. And here he brings up a piece of information that I have no idea if it's true or not, which is the central processing unit of the human brain only has 7 memory registers, which meant that if you had 7 things in your mind at the same time and the thought of something else, one of the other 7 would drop out. So she didn't want to think of this girl to not lose anything she was currently thinking about.
Well, oddly enough, I've heard something similar to that before, and it was suggested in the discussion, I recall, that that's one of the reasons why we use 7 digits in our phone numbers.
Oh,
because that's the limit to a quick memory. So, I don't know, maybe it's true.
Maybe it is.
But then I forgot the last thing I was thinking about, so I don't know what to tell you.
One of the things it reminded me of was I saw an expose about a pickpocket telling people how pickpocketing works. And it all has to do with the mind and perception. So if you figure your body is a vehicle and you're the driver, so imagine that your head is the cabin and you're driving this body. And you're looking out the eyes as what you're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
Behind you, against the back wall, are filing cabinets. And those are your memories.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody asks you a question that requires memory, you get up, turn around, and you go back to the filing cabinets, and you're not looking out your eyes. None of your perceptions of what's happening immediately around you are registering because you're back in the memory files.
That makes clear many conversations that I've had in the past.
So, the way the pickpocket can take your watch or take something without you knowing it is because they'll ask you a question that requires memory, where you have to go back and start thinking about something, which for a split second turns off your forward, whatever perceptions, and they can just take your watch without you feeling it because their mind is elsewhere.
Okay.
All right.
Now that you've stolen my watch, what else would you
That's
like?
right. So despite her best efforts, Kate missed her flight and decided to go home. But before she could get out of the airport, the check-in desk she was at exploded.
Well, technically, it shot up straight into the air.
Yeah,
for
it
quite
did
some
shoot straight up.
distance.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
In this chapter, there was a lot of talk about pizza delivery and how you could not get a pizza delivered in London. I cannot believe with all of the DoorDashes and Grubhubs that are in the world today that is still the case.
Oh, I'm sure it's not.
But back in 1988, no pizza delivery in London. And she used to call up pizza places and harass them.
Right.
So, Chapter 2. So, no cause could be found for the explosion, and a couple of different phrases were used. Non-linear catastrophic structural exasperation, or, to put it another way, the check-in desk had just got fundamentally fed up with being where it was. Did that remind you of anything?
No.
So it reminded me of Elon Musk explaining what seems to continually happen to his SpaceX rockets, which is a rapid, unscheduled disassembly.
Oh. There you go.
So surprisingly, there were no deaths from this explosion.
Even though they had deaths ranging from hundreds to tens of hundreds.
Yes. The news was all over it, just exaggerating the number of deaths to finally have to admit that there weren't any. And a few, including Kate, who passed out, went to the hospital. And while she was unconscious, she was kind of in a dream world.
This is one of the few notes that I actually wrote because I thought it was pretty darn funny.
Well, this passage here is one of the few things I remember from my previous readings of the book.
Uh-huh.
As I was reading it, I think there were only 3 things I actually remembered, and this was one of them. So the passage says, "She was surrounded as far as the eye could see with old cabin trunks full of past memories in which she rummaged with great curiosity and sometimes bewilderment. Or at least about 1/10 of the cabin trunks were full of vivid and often painful or uncomfortable memories of her past life.
Mm-hmm.
The other 9/10 were full of penguins, which surprised her."
It definitely surprised me, but I just thought it was great that she said she'd read somewhere that the human brain was only capable of using 10% of its capacity, and
Right.
she hadn't actually realized that the other 90% was full of penguins.
Yes. Which, for some reason, I thought was going to come back and be important in the book, but doesn't seem to be.
Nope.
When we talked about the first 3 quarters of The Salmon of Doubt, there was a story about him writing a book and having a scene with a bunch of plates with 1 banana on each.
Right.
And he didn't want to tell what that meant at the time of writing to the person that was making him write. And by the time he got to the end of the book, he never cleared it up, and he himself totally forgot what it was all about. So they had to edit the book and take that part out. I wondered if I was ever going to be able to figure out where in the books that was. Well, in the scene with Kate waking up in her hospital room, it read, peering around her in the small room, she saw a white painted plywood cupboard, a couple of tubular steel and vinyl chairs lurking quietly in the shadows, and a white painted plywood bedside cabinet which supported a small bowl with a single banana in it. So this book had to be the one that had all the plates of bananas for some reason.
Oh, yeah, I would imagine. I mean, later on in the book, they're talking about another hospital area where there's a single piece of fruit on a plate. So
Yes.
This is probably it.
Yep. Kate woke up in the hospital room and she stood up shakily and she set off in search of a lavatory. As she opened the doors in her search, she came upon the room of the large Nordic man who appeared unscathed from the explosion at the airport. In his room, unexplainably, was an unplugged, out-of-order Coca-Cola vending machine with an old sledgehammer leaning against it. Kate also found an eagle pecking at the window behind the curtains, and this sent her reeling backwards into the hall where she collapsed.
Right. And one thing that they mention here, which, again, it's those little details that you're going to miss every time,
Right.
is that the eagle's wings were tattooed with circles.
Yes. Yes. Chapter 3, we get to Dirk. And he wakes up sometime after 11 a.m.
One of the things I thought was pretty funny, and this is typical of Douglas Adams, he's talking about Dirk being asleep. And
Right.
at the end, he simply writes, "At last, gently stirred."
Yes.
Which I thought was funny, because of course our
Right.
character here is named Dirk Gently. So
Right.
subtle, but tricky.
Yep. Yep. So there's this long explanation of a now 3-month battle between him and his house cleaner, Elena, regarding who would open the refrigerator first. And there's never a cause mentioned for this battle. I think it's because he wants her to clean it, and if she opens it, she will see how desperately it needs to be cleaned. But it doesn't explain why he won't open it, since he's not the cleaner. So,
Well,
do you have it?
Yeah, I mean, there's another piece of the puzzle here that when we talk about the refrigerator, that I still am a little bit puzzled about, but it doesn't come into play again until chapter 35.
Yeah, the end of the book, yes.
But
well, just to give a warning here to anybody who's listening, is we'll just say there's 35 chapters. There's going to be 34 chapters of nonsense. And chapter 35 is going to rapid fire an explanation for every piece of nonsense that you've read.
Yeah, well, pretty much exactly. But what puzzles me a little bit about the refrigerator here, well, there's two things. First, I'll answer your question. She's not a very good cleaner anyway, because
Right.
there's pizza boxes everywhere and there's a mess everywhere, and she's not cleaning up any of it. And when she's asked why she isn't cleaning it, she simply says, "Well, I thought you left them there on purpose."
Right.
So every action that she doesn't do is a counter to the action that he supposedly has done. So the war of the refrigerator is just a war of attrition where they're trying to determine who's going to break first.
Right.
Now, what bothers me about this particular war is that I don't see guilt playing into it. And again, that'll make sense in 35 chapters.
Right. Right. So when you said that you would like that one passage about Dirk gently stirring, here's another passage that I liked the way Douglas writes, because there's always, to me, the unexpectedness of it. You're just reading,
Right.
you're going along, and then there's this twist at the end which cracks you up that you didn't see coming. And I don't know how, because it's pretty obvious. Dirk's detective business was almost non-existent, and so he dressed up as a gypsy woman to read palms.
Right.
And he did it in a tent in the back garden of a pub.
Mm-hmm.
And however, we know that no matter how hard he tries to cheat or fake it, he always is correct.
Right.
It says, in frustration, Dirk spent several hours that night standing on the roof of his house, shaking his fist at the dark sky and shouting, "Stop it!" until a neighbor complained to the police that he couldn't sleep. And the police had come around in a screaming squad car and woken up the rest of the neighborhood as well.
Oh, yeah, I love that. And again, he uses a phrase in here that I just love. He talks about the way the refrigerator is lurking in the room, and he's talking about motivation, and he says, that way leads to madness or perdition.
Yeah.
Oh, but what's funny about the palmistry thing, we're told here in chapter 3 that everything he tells the individuals in his readings are 100% accurate.
Correct.
And then we go through listening to him tell a young lady that her husband, who's been lost over the North Sea in a fighter jet, will be returned to her in full body and full health, and that she will not be satisfied even though she wins a great sum of money.
Yes.
And what's, of course, funny about this
Wait till chapter 35.
Right, exactly. We're told in chapter 3 that he knew, that is, Dirk, that everything he said was going to be true. But again, at chapter 3, when this happened, Dirk didn't have any idea any of this was going to be true. But like you've already mentioned, chapter 35 tells us that everything he said is true.
Right. But what I will say is Dirk does not know everything he says is true. It just turns out to be true. He doesn't want it to happen.
Right.
And he's trying to just make things up. But everything he makes up just seems to be true.
Turns out to be true. We're not given any other example other than the one woman.
No. So Dirk sat around his kitchen and he was desperately hoping for a client until he realized he was 5 hours late for a meeting he had with the one he forgot about. So in chapter 4, we are introduced to Dirk's old Jaguar, which needs to stop for repairs more often than it's stopped for fuel. And we get to see his method of Zen navigation, which was simply to find any car that looked as if it knew where it was going and follow it. The results were more often surprising than successful, but he felt it was worth it for the sake of the few occasions when it was both. So Zen navigation is the second thing of this book that I do remember.
Right.
So his client that he was late for was kept because he readily agreed to all of Dirk's fees and expenses, and there was one stipulation. Dirk absolutely had to be there by 6:30 a.m. And Dirk thought that was preposterous because nobody got murdered before lunch. And he then goes into a big explanation of why that's true. Here in the book is where they sum up one of the pieces of this puzzle. Dirk wondered how long he could reasonably expect to collect his fees and expenses, including a new refrigerator, from Mr. Anstey, with his strange delusions that he was about to be murdered by a 7-foot-tall, shaggy-haired creature with huge green eyes and horns who habitually waved things at him, a contract written in some incomprehensible language and signed with a splash of blood, and also a kind of scythe. The other notable feature of this creature was that no one other than the client had been able to see it. So here we're introduced to the green-eyed man, or the green-eyed monster.
The green-eyed monster. Actually, it's something else that's kind of funny here, because they do reference it back and forth. They talk about the horoscopes, and one of Dirk's enemies, I guess, works for a newspaper and writes the horoscope. Because this enemy of Dirk's knows his birthday, he always reports that particular horoscope for that particular sign will have a bad day or a bad life or whatever. Right. And I did think it was kind of funny that he says that the newspapers circulation dropped by a 12th after this gentleman became part of their horoscope staff.
Right.
Oh, but you want to know something even stranger than that? And it seems off the topic, but I just have to stick it in here because I was just listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about the travel of the Earth through the solar system.
Right.
And because of the wobble of the Earth and the time that it takes for this wobble to take place, which is 26,000 years, it creates this full circle that, in fact, there are 13 constellations in the sky. So there should be 13 horoscopes, not 12.
Ah.
And
did he say which one they're leaving out?
Yes, it's called Orpheus or Ophius. And you can see it now because we have moved about a 12th of the way through that 26,000 year cycle, because these horoscopes, etc., were written about 2,000 years ago.
Right.
So, again, our friends the Grebulons are hiding up there somewhere, messing with our heads.
So Dirk is on his way to meet his client, and he stopped to get a newspaper, which had a story about there being a missing airline check-in girl from Heathrow after the explosion.
Mm-hmm. Which he steals the newspaper, by the way.
Yes. The picture of this check-in girl in the newspaper was from when she was 6 years old. How desperate are you to put a picture in that you could get a 6-year-old picture of this victim without a current picture?
Well, it turns out that we know who this individual is because we've met her already in the previous book.
Yeah, they haven't revealed it yet, but if they put a current picture, Dirk would know who it was right away.
Exactly.
But they have a picture from when she was 6, and I don't know if that's a jab at British newspapers, because it doesn't make any sense.
I don't know.
So chapter 5, in a basement room, the body of Dirk's client was sitting on a chair in front of the stereo. His head was revolving on the turntable, holding the stylus on the repeating lyrics, "Don't pick it up, pick it up, pick it. Don't pick it up, pick it up, pick it. Don't pick it up, pick it up, pick it."
You did that very well. Thank you.
Thank you. One take.
Oh, but don't you love this description? There's two things in here that I thought were kind of funny.
Okay.
When Dirk shows up at the location, a police officer is downstairs, and Dirk is trying to bluff his way into the thing.
Right.
And it turns out that they're looking for him.
Right.
And the head of the police department, Jelks, right?
Yes.
Has given a description of Dirk that's clearly unflattering. But the police officer immediately recognizes who he is.
Yes.
And then when they describe the scene where the gentleman, Dirk's client, is sitting in a chair, don't you see that Maxell tape commercial in your mind?
Oh, yes, yes.
Because it's exactly that. You see arms out, head back, or shoulders back.
Yeah, and, sitting in front of the speaker.
Exactly in the right position.
Well, because his client was sealed, locked from the inside in his room with no sign of anybody entering or leaving, the police want to rule it as a show-off suicide.
Yeah.
So everything was too much for Dirk, and he went outside to clear his head and get away from the record playing. He kept blaming himself for what happened to Mr. Anstey and thought his death could be all his fault, Well, the one stipulation he had was be there by 6:30. And he doesn't get there till 11:30. So I can see why he's having a bit of, let's say, guilt.
Yes, guilt. And perhaps that's what we're supposed to understand.
So while outside, he met one of his neighbors, a woman, Cynthia Draycott, and she had these large red glasses.
Mm-hmm.
She asked Dirk if he was involved in everything going on, and she admitted to calling the police because the record was annoying her. The tone arm was finally lifted and the record playing stopped. Dirk went back inside. Now that the repeating record verse was stopped, the sound of a TV could be heard upstairs in the house.
Okay, so Dirk goes into the room, sees that his employer, his head has been removed and it's sitting on the turntable.
Correct.
He becomes disoriented, sits down, and breaks a chair. And I'm thinking to myself, what was this pratfall for?
Right, yes.
What was the point of that? And then I get to this part where you're going to tell the story of the television.
Right.
And this part is not explained in chapter 35, and I don't think it ever will be.
No, it
doesn't make a damn bit of sense.
Before I read about chapter 6, I'm just going to say that the police who are investigating this show-off suicide didn't clear the house.
No, they did not. I mean, it's funny what happens,
yes.
You know, and to that end, I'll say that our friend Dirk has taken on the characteristics of Agrajag within this story. So it's clearly the universe has something to say to him.
Yes, it does.
But he's not really listening.
No. So Dirk goes upstairs, and on the wall of the bathroom, he found a gold record for a song called Hot Potato by a band called Pugilism and the Third Autistic Cuckoo. And from behind the record fell a large envelope that had been opened and resealed many times. And it also had many names on the front of it. All of them were crossed out except for the last one, which was the name of his client. Now the TV could be heard coming from the attic, so Dirk went up. And there he found a boy of 13 or 14 who was the victim's son watching cartoons. He barely looked away from the cartoons and didn't even acknowledge Dirk's presence until Dirk turned off the TV. Then the boy attacked Dirk and broke his nose. Then the boy screamed in rage and pummeled Dirk as he climbed over to plug the TV back in. When the TV was turned back, the news showed the current photo of the missing airline check-in girl, and it was Dirk's former secretary from the previous book. So Dirk went back downstairs and told Sergeant Gilks about the boy in the attic, and then left. As he walked up the street...
Right. Well, he specifically told Sergeant Gilks to go upstairs and interview the boy upstairs, but before he started the interview, he should turn off the TV.
Right. Oh, man.
So, again, we're talking little pratfalls here, because here's Dirk hobbling down the stairs with a broken nose. Just silly.
Yes. So as Dirk was leaving, he was swooped on by an eagle. So the eagle makes another appearance.
Right.
After a few failed attempts by the police to get the boy to talk or whatever, the boy was brought a small portable TV and was quietly led out of the house.
And that's the last you hear of him.
Yeah. Then the book basically reads, once all the policemen had departed, a large, hairy, green-eyed figure emerged from its hiding place behind one of the molecules in the large basement room. It dipped a long, gnarled finger in the almost congealed pool of blood that had collected on the deck of the turntable, smeared the finger across the bottom of a sheet of thick, yellowing paper, and then disappeared off into a dark and hidden otherworld. Chapter 7. So now we go back in time a little bit, and we're introduced to an old, one-eyed man in his bed at the Woods Head Hospital, and he had just hurled his newspaper to the floor. His name was variously given as Mr. Odwin, or Woden, or Odin. He is a god. He is angry about what he has read in the newspaper about the events at the airport, and Odin knew it had to be Thor. God, there's a pun there, but I can't think of what it is.
And even if you could, you wouldn't tell it, right?
No.
Because it would just destroy the entire movie.
No, we'll let you do the official Thor pun when it comes to you. So Odin had to think about what he should do about Thor. Odin is obsessed with fresh bed linen and had a routine with the nurses every day. The head nurse does not like Mr. Odwin's personal assistant, Mr. Rag. So here it says, Mr. Rag gave her the absolute heebie-jeebies. She went to look for him. She had been relieved to discover when she came on duty this morning that Mr. Rag had left the premises the previous night, but had then spotted him returning. She found him exactly where he was not supposed to be. He was squatting on one of the seats in the visitors' waiting room, wearing what looked horribly like a soiled and discarded doctor's gown that was much too big for him. Not only that, but he was playing a thinly unmusical tune on a sort of pipe that he had obviously carved out of a large disposable hypodermic syringe. So Mr. Rag, or Toe Rag like we know, do you know him from Norse mythology?
He's not a Norse mythological creature.
Okay, because I've never heard of Toe Rag before.
No, the word Torag actually means a contemptible or despicable person. That's all it means.
Okay, well, they have nailed him.
I know. It's funny because I really thought there are two occasions in this book where I thought they were referring to Nordic individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And this one I really thought was going to be somebody. I also thought perhaps the green-eyed monster would be somebody.
Right.
And there's one other person that we're introduced to much later, which clearly you would think is someone who would be in the Nordic mythology, but isn't.
Okay. So in Chapter 8, Kate discharged herself from the hospital and went home. And there she took a bath. And it is here we are told something that comes up later. She felt faintly embarrassed by the sheer profusion of things she had for putting in baths. But she was for some reason incapable of passing any chemist or herb shop without going in and being seduced by some glass-stoppered bottle of something blue or green or orange and oily that was supposed to restore the natural balance of some vague substance she didn't even know she was supposed to have in her pores. There were powders as well as oils, tubes of gel, even packets of some kind of pungent-smelling seed that was meant to be good for some obscure part of you in some arcane way. So believe it or not, that comes back.
I know.
In the bath, she started thinking of the large Nordic man from the airport.
All right, now you're just trying to make it interesting, right?
Yeah.
I understand.
Sorry,
you know.
did I read that
at this
incorrectly?
point, I've got a large void in my descriptions of the story, and I go all the way up to chapter 30-something before I have anything to say. So
Yes. So anyway, she was thinking about how she saw him in a coma at one of the rooms in the hospital, and she asked a nurse about him, and the nurse was very reluctant to say anything. All she would say is that the man was not there anymore, in one word, that Kate wrote on a piece of paper. Woodshead. Chapter 9. The large man, Thor, wakes up in a derelict warehouse on his back, glued to the floor. He sees his sledgehammer and with a word sends the hammer up and down through the floor all around him, cutting himself free. As he emerged from the hole in the floor, he sees a large Coca-Cola machine with a note on it from Odin telling him to stop whatever it is he is doing. He also told him to remember whales. He felt being glued to the floor was Odin's way of reminding him to do just what he asked at the time of all the unpleasantness with the Phantom fighter jet. Why can't you just stick to the ground? So here, remember folks, Phantom fighter jet, and why can't you just stick to the ground? Mm-hmm. Well, you'll be reminded of it in 35.
Well, the stick to the ground is clearly here because he's been glued to the floor by Torag because he's following, Torag supposedly is following Odin's suggestion that he glue him down.
Right. So anyway, here Thor is realizing that bad things are happening when he gets angry, and it made him feel ill. So Thor had a confrontation with the goblin Torag, Odin's personal assistant, which, you know, if Torag is Odin's personal assistant, you'd imagine that he'd have something to do with Norse, but no.
Nope. And he can move Thor's hammer, which I thought was a little unusual.
Right. Thor told Torag to give Odin the message that he will meet him at the challenging hour in the halls of Asgard. And Torag says, again. Thor confirms.
Oh, gosh.
Chapter 10. After going to the shop and buying an electronic I Ching calculator, which could not work out any calculation with an answer greater than 4, Dirk went to a cafe to have a cup of coffee. There he set out the newspaper, the calculator, and the envelope with the crossed out names. Having difficulty ordering, he stole a girl's coffee when she looked away. He went to a payphone to call a friend, Nobby, to buy a new refrigerator. He wanted it delivered, but he was not going to be home. He was told, gaining access to houses in the absence of their owners is only one of the panoply of skills with which my lads are blessed. Let me know if you find anything missing afterwards, by the way.
Right, because he was on the seedier side of appliance delivery.
Yes. And acquisition. Well, his old refrigerator had to get out. And right. This is how they're setting up the removal of his old refrigerator.
Mm-hmm.
So while on the phone, the song Hot Potato started playing in the cafe. He went back to his table, and the girl whose coffee he stole was sitting there. She helped straighten Dirk's broken nose and then introduced herself as Sally Mills, a nurse. She worked at the hospital where Kate and Thor were treated. As Dirk left, he noticed Sally left the book she was reading on her original table and swiped it. It was Run Like the Devil by Howard Bell. As he stepped out into the street, he was once again swooped on by an eagle. Chapter 11.
It's all the same eagle.
Yes, it is all. It's all the same eagle until they get to Asgard. Then there's a whole bunch of eagles. Kate Schechter arrived at Woods Head Hospital to meet with the chief consultant psychologist, Mr. Ralph Standish. She was able to get this meeting through a former doctor of hers, Alan Franklin. Woods Head is, as Kate put it, in the business of giving scholarships to people with particularly gifted diseases. She was invited to see a few of their more gifted patients. She was looking for Thor. The first patient she was shown was a little girl who mumbled to herself yesterday's stock market prices. The next patient she met, I like how he was described, one of the most deeply and disturbingly tousled people that Kate had ever seen. In fact, it was only his hair that was tousled, but it was tousled to such an extreme degree that it seemed to draw all of his long face up into its distressed chaos. His particular ailment is that he channels Dustin Hoffman. He says everything Dustin Hoffman says a second before Dustin Hoffman says it. This is just him having fun with weird, goofy things, I think. None of this comes back.
I know. Exactly.
As her tour continued, she looked out a window and noticed a large, heavy, serious-looking gray van. I really liked what was written about the van, though. It caught her attention in the brief instant that it was within her view because it very clearly wasn't a baker's van or a laundry van. Baker's vans and laundry vans advertise their business and have words like bakery and laundry painted on them, whereas this van was completely blank. Oh. So the next patient she was shown was Mrs. Elspeth May. Unlike the lady who took dictation from the dead composers, she takes dictation from dead physicists. Great advancements are being made of it, and current scientists are at a loss for what to do. Kate tells Standish the old joke, "We're terribly worried about Uncle Henry. He thinks he's a chicken." "Well, why don't you take him to the doctor?" "Well, we would, only we need the eggs." And Standish, who has never heard a joke before, said the joke was an astounding insight to the central paradoxes of the human condition and of our indefatigable facility for constructing adaptive rationales to account for it. So Standish wanted to hear more jokes, and he now requires his staff to tell them every day. As Kate's visit was coming to an end, she started to press harder to see if Thor was there, and she was interrupted by an old, frail, one-eyed man, Mr. Odwin. He was accompanied by a diminutive man, Torag. They both claimed to know her, and Torag called her by name. Chapter 12.
Oh.
Kate left the Woods Head shortly after the serious-looking gray van. On her drive, she thought back upon her visit and was confused by a couple of things. Why did Standish turn hostile immediately after meeting Mr. Odwin? And how did Mr. Odwin and his goblin-like companion know her name? One thing was cleared up for her. The rumors of a goblin creature causing havoc around the area of the Woods Head must be true. The distraction of thinking about all of these things caused her to make a wrong turn and take an alternate route back to London. With all of these thoughts weighing her down, she decided she needed some fresh air and a brisk walk to clear her head and change her mood. She pulled her car over to the side of the road and stopped, and was immediately ran into by an old Jaguar.
It's Dirk!
So when Dirk follows a car, Dirk really follows a car.
Right, exactly. He's so close, he's like right up her tailpipe.
Yeah. So Dirk and Kate are sorting things out after the crash, and Dirk started following her only after he was almost run off the road by a gray van.
Right, so I have to remember here that Dirk Gently's holistic detective agency is based on the interconnectedness of all things.
Yes.
And it falls in line that at this point, Dirk has met, interviewed, and interacted with the nurse that Kate was talking with.
Yep.
And now he's run into Kate's car by simply following his instinct, which is to look for a car that seems to know where it's going and following it.
And immediately before that, they just told us she was distracted and made a wrong turn. So she clearly did not know where she was going.
Not at that moment. But that's why they crashed.
Yes. So Dirk and Kate, this is chapter 14. Dirk and Kate went to a pub as Kate's car was towed away. There she told Dirk the events she could remember, starting with the cat she needed somebody to watch, but her neighbor, who was going to do it, had died. So he's got a thing about cats, too. Cats have to make an appearance in all the Dirk Gently novels.
I guess.
After that, the conversation changed to the book that Dirk stole from Sally Mills in the cafe. Dirk still has no idea why he took it. The author sells so many books that his name, Howard Bell, is always above and larger than the title of the book. So Dirk is told that Howard Bell has some strange tendencies. One of which is that he always has live chickens sent to his hotel suite, and they are never seen again. Not even a single feather. And nobody knows, or seems to want to know, what happens to them. Kate also mentioned that her brother David says that it is the perfect publishing name because the last name can be very big and the first name fits above it in narrower letters. It looks very impressive. However, it is a very ordinary name when it is written normally, like on the envelope Dirk is carrying. So Dirk and Kate are having a conversation, and Dirk didn't want to tell her too much because he was saying that it was impossible. And Kate gave him the Sherlock Holmes principle, but Dirk just rejects that. And I really loved his reason for it. So I thought it's just best to read it.
All right.
So, for the example of the little girl quoting yesterday's stock prices was used as an example. The idea that she is somehow receiving yesterday's stock market prices apparently out of thin air is merely impossible, and therefore must be the case. Because the idea that she is maintaining an immensely complex and laborious hoax of no benefit to herself is hopelessly improbable. The first idea merely supposes that there is something we don't know about, and God knows there are enough of those. The second, however, runs contrary to something fundamentally human which we do know about. We should therefore be very suspicious of it and all of its specious rationality. So it's like the idea that this is a hoax is so ludicrous, it can't possibly be true. It is easier to believe in the impossible.
Right. And you know what? I was thinking it was funny. My silly explanation for that little girl, I've heard stories of people that have fillings in their teeth that picks up radio stations. So I'm thinking to myself, well, she's just picking up a radio station that's just rattling off this information, and she's just hearing it in her head and just repeating it, you know? So not really supernatural in any way. It's just a coincidence of her teeth.
Right. So the one thing that Dirk did tell Kate is that he thinks that she's in danger, and Dirk said that she should come back to his place, and he was laughed at. So the mechanic returned Kate's repaired car.
Right. And then I do love this little scene, and it's kind of funny. So after Kate leaves, Dirk is left on his own, and he's immediately going to follow her because he's concerned that Kate's in trouble.
Right.
But he gets in his car, and his car won't start.
Yes.
So then he's forced to contact the mechanic again. And of course, by this time, the mechanic has been drinking.
Right.
And Dirk is desperate to get into his car and take off, but the mechanic keeps stalling and rattling stuff off and chatting away. Well, then he comes up with this brilliant idea, which I frankly think is pretty brilliant.
I did not remember this part, and it is my favorite part of the whole book because it is genius. Let's set up a little bit. The mechanic is telling him the expense and the time needed to repair his car.
Right. And he's going on and on and on. And Dirk is just getting more and more frustrated. So Dirk runs over, takes the mechanic's vehicle, jumps in the car, and drives 10 minutes down the road, where he parks and waits.
And hides.
And shortly after that, here comes the mechanic in Dirk's car, now working just as he needs it to work. And as soon as the mechanic jumps out of Dirk's car, Dirk jumps in his car and takes off. And I thought, that's one way of getting action out of the car.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Oh, that scene was so good. And I didn't see it coming. I didn't know why he stopped. I'm like, why did he stop after he stole the van? He should keep going.
I didn't realize it either, but I'm thinking, that's a brilliant way of getting action.
Yeah. So Kate arrives home and she parks her car in front of her house. And instead of going straight in, she walked the next street down to go to a convenience store to pick up a few things. Milk and trash bags. On the way back to her flat, every street lamp she passed under every light she looked at went out. And I know I overly summarized this part, and I did it because this is another one of the few things that I remember reading. And for some reason, I put this way up at the top of my favorite Douglas Adams passages because the way he writes this was just perfect to me. So even if you don't want to read the book, the next time you see a copy in a store or library, pick it up and just read chapter 15.
A ringing endorsement.
Yes.
Chapter 15.
So eventually, standing under the last street lamp, Kate saw a large silhouetted horned figure. And Kate yelled at it to tell her who it was. And the figure simply asked her if she had anything that could get the bits of floorboard off his back. So the figure under the light was Thor, and he admitted that he was responsible for the lights going out. And Kate was angry. And Thor said that she needed to know who he was. And he also said that he came because he still had her address on the piece of paper she gave him at the airport. And at that moment, a large eagle swooped down at Thor, and Thor beat it away, and the eagle retreated to the top of a lamppost. And Thor told it, "Go, the matter is beyond my power. All I can do, I have done. Your family is provided for. You I can do nothing more for. I myself am powerless and sick." So this is again referring to the eagle with the concentric circle pattern on its wings.
Exactly.
So Thor jumped up to the top of the lamppost to battle with the eagle. And here I think he went a little bit too far because I'm trying to imagine fighting on lamppost tops.
Oh, angels on the head of pins.
Yeah. So after the battle and the eagle flying away, Thor had cuts on his arms and went to Kate's flat for treatment. In the hallway at the bottom of the stairs was a Coca-Cola vending machine, which distressed her downstairs neighbor, Neil, very much.
That's all you need to say about Neil.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really know the purpose of Neil.
He plays the bass.
He plays the bass.
And he likes the song The Ride of the Valkyries.
Yeah, he's
his whole point.
a big Wagner fan.
Wagner fan, that's it.
On Dirk's drive home, he's stuck in traffic, and his mind and his subconscious start turning. It starts with him thinking he might have seen a gray van. Then he starts to puzzle together, hypothetically, that a god, let's say Thor, to pick at random, would be responsible for the event at the airport, because how and why would he have a passport or a credit card? All right, here's a big change of subject. And this is so blatant that there's no way it will slip by. Here is the line straight from the book.
Mm-hmm.
He wondered for a moment what it was like to be a whale.
Yep. Well, this is from his Last Chance to See. You know, this is really about Douglas Adams and his ecological concerns.
Right. Yeah, so that paragraph about whales was a comparison about how the whales had to live and adapt to oceans full of noise, to what if there were gods on Earth, their lives would be like in the modern era. So we get to chapter 18, and Odin is in his trolley bed and arrives at the gates to the halls of Valhalla in an unmarked gray van. And Odin was there because of the challenge of Thor. And this annoyed Odin because he would be made to listen once again to all kinds of self-indulgent claptrap from his bone-headed, thunderous son who would not accept, could not accept, simply did not have the intelligence to accept the new realities of life. He would not accept them, and he must be extinguished. And tonight, Asgard would see the extinction of an immortal god.
And all that Odin can think about are crisp, clean, white sheets.
Yes. Yeah.
Oy, oy, oy.
Chapter 19. So Dirk drove home, wrestling with the hypothesis in his head, refusing to believe it might be true. As a result of this distraction, he rear-ended another vehicle. This time it was a dark blue BMW. As he and the gentleman were exchanging information, the gentleman's wife, with the large red glasses, exited the vehicle, and Dirk recognized her as Mr. Anstey's neighbor. Dirk looked at the gentleman's card. He is a lawyer, and read the name Clive Draycott. He is a partner at the firm and handles the ARG, Aries Rising Record Group Holdings, account. After Draycott drove away, Dirk went home and was greeted by a large golden eagle sitting on his doorstep. 20. Kate brought Thor into her flat and started yelling at him, asking him what the big deal was. Thor did not answer. Kate decided to clean up the wound from the eagle for him, and Thor refused antibiotic ointment. He insisted on a litany of things. Crushed leaves of cedra, oil of the kernel of the apricot, an infusion of bitter orange blossom, oil of almonds, sage, and comfrey. And Kate happened to have all those ingredients in the multitude of bath products she habitually purchased and poured all of them and more into a bath for Thor.
I like his last ingredient, though. He said he needed vengeance.
Yes, a little bit of vengeance. She didn't have that.
And she put, what, Calvin Klein's Obsession in for that or something?
21. After Dirk decided he would go see what the eagle wanted, he tentatively got out of his car that was parked a few doors down. He walked up the street to his house and kept the blue Renault between him and the eagle. As he slowly walked around the car, a lack of attention to where he was going caused him to trip, and he lunged at the eagle with his arms outstretched. The eagle moved aside, and Dirk struck his temple on a step. Groggily getting to his feet, Dirk fumbled for his keys and unlocked and opened his front door. The eagle flew inside. Dirk picked up an envelope he was expecting off the mat and noticed that a picture and a chair were missing. He hurried to the kitchen, followed by the eagle, and noticed many other things were missing. However, he did have a new refrigerator, and Dirk made a list. Dirk removed his coat and had set them on a chair. The eagle started to show signs of aggression, so Dirk quickly left the kitchen and slammed and barricaded himself behind the door. The eagle dive-bombed the door with a great thud every few seconds. Dirk wanted to examine the envelope, but it was in his jacket, which was in the kitchen. Timing it correctly, Dirk opened the door as the eagle flew toward it, and it flew out the door and crashed into a wall, and Dirk barricaded himself in the kitchen. So there he opened up the newly delivered envelope and saw the sheet music for Hot Potato. He retrieved a kitchen knife and slid open the tape of the other envelope with all the crossed out names on it, and a thick bundle of papers fell out.
Right, and at this point, in a conversation he had earlier, all of the people in the story basically are listed on this envelope.
Right.
All the individuals, Belle, and isn't that discovered mostly in the scene with
yes,
Kate at the restaurant?
Yeah, she points out, like the name on your envelope there. See how normal it looks?
Right. So so at this point, all of these individuals are listed on this envelope. And of course, the last name on the envelope is Mr. Anstey, Dirk's final client.
Right. And all the people on the envelope have been wildly successful.
Yes.
Including Mr. Anstey, who had the hit song Hot Potato. So 22. Thor emerged from his perfumed bath and wafted into the room where Kate was. And as Kate was interrogating Thor, she learned of his penance from Odin for Thor to count all the stones in Wales. Hence, when Odin said, "Remember Wales," it was a punishment that he gave Thor for being bad, which was to count all the stones. Kate asked how many there were, and Thor got angry and refused to tell her because he wanted to be the only one who ever knew. However, he fears he lost count.
What else would an immortal do than count the stones in Wales?
Yes. And so Thor was explaining about how the ancient gods walk the earth today, and Kate was teasing him, and Thor got angry, and a lamp fell off the table, crashed to the floor, and became a frightened kitten.
Yeah, they don't actually mention Kate's cat while they're at her place, though. Well, I guess she's still with the neighbor.
Yeah, we don't know exactly where the cat is because the neighbor died.
Right. But presumably she got someone else to look after the cat because she was on her way to Oslo.
Right. In chapter 23, Dirk laid out all the papers that fell out of the envelope, and he could not read the indecipherable runic script laid out with a lot of writing on the left and occasional characters on the right, lined up under each other. He then scrutinized all the name on the outside of the envelope, and he determined, piecing together interviews he had seen, that Anstey must have overheard a conversation about a hot potato and thought it would make a good song. When he eventually got the hot potato, he did not pass it on, but instead hid it behind his gold record, and then the big one came.
Which, of course, is the lyric in the song.
Right.
Don't hold on to it when the big one comes.
So Dirk really needed cigarettes, so he snuck out of his kitchen window to get some. As he was jumping to the ground, he realized he did not have his car keys, which were still in the house. He peeked through the mail slot to see where the eagle was, and a talon grabbed the back of his hand and a beak gouged his nose. So he's been punched in the face. He tripped and fell and hit his head. He's been gouged by an eagle. He is not having a good day.
Right. And a talon through his hand.
So after a few minutes, he used a pencil to open the flap and saw the eagle perched on the banister. And the eagle stood and spread its wings, displaying itself to Dirk. And Dirk could see the wings had concentric circle markings. So I wrote this down, but I don't know what it refers to. While Dirk was busy with the eagle, a man came up and asked for money for a cup of tea or a cigarette.
Right.
The man seemed completely disoriented, and when asked if he'd lost something, he mentioned the sky and the ground. So who was that?
I got the impression that at that moment, as the eagle is spreading out its wings, it's able to project some individual out into space, and that individual is confused and disoriented, and that is who is walking up to Dirk at that moment asking for a cigarette.
Okay.
And Dirk finally gives him a coin, and the guy disappears because the eagle becomes further engaged again.
Right.
Kind of like a specter, if you will.
Yes, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it will in 35. So in chapter 24, Thor and Kate left her house and walked down the street. And here it confirms what Thor had been telling Kate earlier. What he doesn't know is that he must generate an SEP field.
Right.
It says, they passed 3 different people on the way, and she saw distinctly how their eyes avoided looking at him, even as they had to make allowances for his great bulk as he passed them.
Right.
He was not invisible, far from it. He simply didn't fit.
Right. And just prior to this, of course, he's explained to Kate that they are going to go to Asgard. And when Kate asks where Asgard is, Thor says, well, Asgard is here, just behind these tiny particles, atoms, right, or molecules.
Molecules, yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so with a twist of his wrist, they were now in a new world, Asgard, and about 1.5 miles from the great halls of Valhalla. And he set to throw his hammer again, but this time when he hurled it, he held onto it with one hand and held onto Kate with the other. 25. Dirk is now walking the night looking for a place to buy cigarettes, and he's made his way to King's Cross Station. So here Douglas puts in a little piece of social commentary that is still relevant today, talking about the homeless.
Yes.
Here were the people that nobody wanted anything from at all. This was where they gathered for shelter until they were periodically shooed out. There was something people wanted from them, in fact, their absence. That was in hot demand, but not easily supplied. Everybody has to be somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So he ends up getting a cigarette from an old man. As Dirk thanks the man for the cigarette, he also relays part of his adventures with the eagle. And the man replies, to everything that Dirk says.
Over and over again.
Over and over and over. So Dirk shows him his wounds, and the old man says, infuse some blossom of the bitter orange, add some sprinklings of sage while it is still warm. This is very good for eagle wounds. There are those who will add apricot and almond oil, and even, heavens defend us, cedra. But then there are always those who will overdo things. And sometimes we have need of them.
Right.
Oh,
It does become clear here, of course, that to us anyway, as the reader, that he's talking to someone from Asgard, and we are to assume, I guess, that he's some kind of minor deity.
Yes. Walking our world today.
Right. But of course, we don't know, and we're not told who he might be or what god he might represent.
Correct. So all the people at the station started to leave together in a stream, and Dirk followed them to an old Gothic hulking building, the Midland Grand Hotel, and then across the street to San Pancras Station. Dirk, trying to stay out of sight, followed them inside, and there were as many as 100. But the crowd seemed to thin as time went on, and Dirk did not see where they had gone. Dirk rushed to the center of the concourse, but by the time he got there, it was empty. Chapter 26. We get to learn everything Kate is feeling as she and Thor are hurtled through the air behind the hammer to the area in Asgard that represents what we would call the North Sea. Thor told Kate he met her at an airport to fly to Norway on a plane. Kate asked why he did not just fly that way. He told her he tried, but something happened he did not want to talk about. So, here's where they're setting up the reason that he quit flying, and his alternative was to take a plane.
Right.
But that doesn't make sense to me, because before he flew, he did this apple twisting motion that brought them to that dimension of Asgard. So why doesn't he just go to Asgard, fly to where he wants, and twist it again and zap back? Like, you could do all of your traveling in the other dimension when you...
Right. And the only explanation we have for that is he does say that the result of the activity that's going on has left him sick and confused. So we can only assume that he didn't consider that as an option.
Right.
Until today, which is how he ends up where he needs to be.
Right. All I'm going to say is that they meet this other god who wants to kill herself, and in the book, she mispronounces her name 3 times before she says it correctly. So if I do not say this name correctly, she can't even say her name. So they meet Sulliwaensis, who was just about to kill herself, and they went to her tiny shack.
Right, and she is the other character that I'm assuming you assumed was also a Norse god or character.
Yes.
And she is not.
Oh, really?
The only reference that I saw that may or may not play into it is she may be considered a guard for Asgard, but there's no, as much research as I could do, I did not find that verified again in any way. So Sulliwaensis is just Sulliwaensis.
Right.
She's from Asgard. That's all we know.
So she's in that other realm, and she's telling Kate that this desolate world was not always this desolate, but the changes in our world changed theirs. And many of the immortals have succumbed to the Ankhs, which is an affliction of not being able to take being a god anymore. So basically, human beings don't need the Norse gods anymore, and they still exist, but they're not needed, and they have trouble dealing with it. Chapter 27. In St. Pancras Station, Dirk was trying to figure out how all the people disappeared. The bill from the cafe fell out of his pocket when he retrieved the pack of cigarettes. The style of the bill, with the items on the left and the charges on the right, were like the bills he created. They were also in the same style as the papers in the envelope with the runic script he could not decipher. He thought it might also be a bill, but he did not know what the charge was. As he moved to throw the receipt away, a couple walked into the station. A well-dressed man and a woman wearing large red glasses, the Dracots. He watched out of sight, and they vanished. Since he was frustrated, he wanted to frustrate someone else. He decided to call Kate because it would both frustrate her as well as reassure him that she was okay. He got her machine again and was informed that she went to Valhalla. So Dirk realized that the giant empty space he was in would make an ideal great hall. Now, knowing what he was looking for, he entered the space again. And moving very, very slowly, he was able to locate some sound and slip behind a molecule and vanish. And he immediately had to duck to avoid an eagle swooping at him.
Oh my gosh. I wonder whether Douglas Adams ever had an eagle swoop at him.
I don't know. Maybe.
There's a lot of swooping in this little section.
Yes. So chapter 28. And then he was swooped on by many eagles and took refuge behind a table.
And the other thing that I thought was funny here, as you're about to describe, is that I guess Douglas Adams has no love for pigs.
No.
Except perhaps in the barbecued sense.
Right. It's funny. I actually don't think I put that quote in here. Like, there's all these challenges, but they just come for the pigs.
Yeah.
So Dirk had to wonder why the Draycots were here and where they could be. So while Dirk was moving around the station, he overheard a conversation and a very familiar "oh." He saw the old man from King Cross Station, and he was easily feeding one of the eagles by hand. And Dirk decided that the trick must be to make friends with the eagles, so offered one a hunk of meat, and it attacked him. The old man shooed the eagle away, and Dirk joined the old man at the table. So the challenging hour comes, and Thor's not there, and Dirk and the old man have a conversation, and the OIing back and forth, and Dirk wants to know what Thor's challenge is, and the old man asks what difference it made to Dirk since he was immortal, and he and his kind got what they wanted out of it, and Dirk had no idea what he was talking about.
Right.
The old man told him that Thor claims Odin had entered into a contract for the sale of an immortal soul, and Odin has sold his soul to man. And Dirk realized that Odin did not sell his soul to man, but to a man and a woman, a lawyer and an advertiser, the Draycots. Because Thor realizes that bad things happen when he gets angry, he had to get out a lot of frustration before going to the Great Hall of Valhalla. Thor loses his temper and screams for Odin and Torag as he puts on a magnificent display of strength and godly powers with his hammer. When it is all over, he told Kate that a god can show off once in a while, can't he? And Sulioensis came over, calling Thor a noisy boy. He was gone when she got there, and she and Kate guessed that he must be the tiny speck flying away. 30. Cynthia Draycott hated all of this. Clive told her it was almost over. Everything will be just fine. It'll be 100% perfect. There was a clear breach of contract that will give them everything they want and release them from all obligations. Cynthia asked about this other person, and Clive said they could cut him in or pay him off. And here they're talking about Dirk.
Right.
So Clive went to see Dirk and figured he was the new agent for Odin. He talked about Torag being ineffective and scaring him off and not being able to draw up a proper contract.
Right. Actually, let me just say this. Finally, it's not really clear at one point, but Dirk is having a conversation with the OI guy.
Right.
And finally realizes that Thor would be up in the balcony area of the hall, and figures that he has to get up there.
Right.
And that's when he realizes that's where the Draycots are.
Right.
And he heads up there. So the next time we see Dirk, he's coming into the antechamber in the Great Hall near where Odin is,
Mm-hmm.
and he represents himself as Odin's agent.
Right.
Now, we aren't really clear about that. It's not really clear what's going on at that particular moment, but Draycott has a conversation with Dirk as if he is now Odin's agent.
Right. And he told Dirk that Odin is set up in Woods Head Hospital with all the fresh linen he could ever want. And he mentions how all the gods have no place of honor anymore and are lost in today's modern world with all the power in the world with no idea how to use it.
Right.
He tells him about Odin seeing a commercial with an actor playing a god, and Odin thought that since he is a god, maybe he could get paid for being in a commercial.
Right. And again, here's one of those references where we didn't talk about it earlier, but earlier in the book, we are introduced to, I know when it was. And maybe this is why the scene is there now that I actually think about it.
Okay.
So we were talking about the nephew or the son.
Yes.
We're talking about the son. And while the son is watching TV, they cut to a commercial that shows Satan's fall from heaven.
Right.
And as he falls, drinks this soda that's called Shades, and this soda is so refreshing and wonderful, that anyway, and then there's a reference, of course, to Hades.
Right.
So that scene with the sun is where the commercial that Odin saw is
right.
related to us in the story. So here now in chapter 30-ish, we were again brought back to that same commercial and told that when Odin saw the commercial, he thought to himself, oh, I could do that. And
right.
maybe I can be, rich and famous too.
Yes. So Odin goes to Cynthia's ad agency. And at first she wrote him off, but she introduced him to Clive and they realized that he was for real. And they didn't want to be greedy, like owning the world or anything, which they could. The only thing they wanted was their basic requirements and to bow out and to know no more about it. Then he says this. So then I have this idea. It's like you buy a big property and then you sell off what you don't want. That way you get what you want and a lot of other people get what they want, only they get it through you and they feel a little obligated to you. And they remember who they got it through because they sign a piece of paper which says how obligated they feel to you. And money flows back to pay for our Mr. Odin's very, very, very expensive private medical care. He also said that he didn't need much since everything they needed was taken care of. Then Torag presented him with a bill, and the bill was a tricky little subtotal thing, a hot potato. So he got it taken care of and passed it on. Then the hot potato ended up at his neighbor's, and that is a penalty clause, because they wanted to know nothing about it, and here their neighbor has this hot potato. So now that they have everything they could want, they can cancel the whole thing, and Woods Head Hospital number is over. And he told Dirk he could have anything he wanted, and Dirk told him just to see him dead. And Dirk left the room to tell his new client they might have a problem. Chapter 31.
Mm-hmm.
Dirk left Valhalla and his dejected client and emerged in the Midland Grand Hotel. The vacant hotel was locked and a side door was manned by a security guard who demanded to know how Dirk got in there. Dirk left the hotel and went across the street to a station booking hall, through the station to the main entrance, and then out to the street and down the steps. Here he's showing that Dirk's bad day is not over. As he emerged onto the street, he was so surprised to not be instantly swooped upon by a passing eagle that he tripped and stumbled and was run over by the first of the early morning's motorcycle couriers.
And breaks his leg.
Yes. Chapter 32.
I gotta say, Jeff, by the time we get to this chapter here, things start to move awful fast.
Yes, they do.
And it's a little bit confusing, and I think we'll talk more about that at the very end.
Right. Thor crashes through the wall of Valhalla to show everyone a copy of the contract Odin signed, but everyone was gone. With a twist of his wrist, Thor and Kate flicked through the world divide and ended up in the old grungy hotel suite with an old one-eyed man on a trolley bed with fresh linen. So Thor confronts Odin and says that he found the contract that Odin sold all their power. He could not steal Thor's since Thor was too strong, and therefore Odin tried to keep Thor from getting to Norway by keeping him confused and making bad things happen when he used his power.
Right.
Thor tore up the contract and incinerated it. He then said he was going to make right all of the bad things he made happen when Thor got angry. And now here is where they put all of these odd pieces together.
The jigsaw finally falls together.
Yes. The poor girl at the airline check-in desk that got turned into a drink machine, woof, wham, she's back. The jet fighter that tried to shoot me down when I was flying to Norway, woof, wham, it's back. Kate asked about the jet fighter. He said he tried to shoot him down over the North Sea and they had a scrap, and in the heat of the moment, he turned it into an eagle. He did what he could about it. He took care of his wife by fixing one of those lottery things. Kate's table lamp shall be a small kitten no more. Woof, wham. Thor speaks, and it is so. So the Coke machine was the check-in girl at the airport.
Mm-hmm.
The eagle is a jet fighter. The specter outside asking for a cigarette and being confused was the pilot. We knew the kitten was the lamp.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a loud noise and a ruddy glow spread across the sky. What was that? We'll find out later. So Odin laments that he has been evil and unwise. He also does not think that he can live without his fresh linen. Torag said he should kill Thor, but he would rather kill himself. He does not know what to do. Kate tells Thor that she has the answer of what to do and will tell him on one condition. Tell her how many stones there are in Wales. Thor said, no, anything but that.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I lost count.
Mm-hmm.
33. The Green Eye and Torag left Valhalla and got some horses and a cart. Torag whipped the horses cruelly and in a few minutes refused to go any further despite it. They eventually panicked and overturned the cart in terror. Torag saw Dirk's old refrigerator rattling on a trash heap. Green Eye went to kill it, and it sprang open, revealing a new and powerful god. Chapter 34. We now have a replay of Chapter 7, where Odin is upset reading the newspaper about another god cutting loose and making a nuisance of himself. Here's what he read. A missing jet fighter aircraft had mysteriously erupted under full power from out of a house in North London into which it could not conceivably have been thought to have fit.
That's Dirk's house, of course.
That's Dirk's house. It had instantly lost its wings and gone into a screaming dive and crashed and exploded in a main road. The pilot had managed to eject during the few seconds he had in the air and had landed, shaken, bruised, but otherwise unharmed and babbling about strange men with hammers flying over the North Sea.
So the man is returned to his wife.
Yeah.
Unharmed.
Unharmed. Luckily, because of the time at which the inexplicable disaster had occurred, the roads were almost deserted. And apart from massive damage to property, the only fatalities to have occurred were as yet unidentified occupants of a car which was thought to have been possibly a BMW and possibly blue, though because of the rather extreme nature of the accident, it was rather hard to tell. But I have a feeling there's a pair of red glasses laying right outside.
Oh, that's definitely them. They have died in this horrific accident.
So Kate came in and told Odin that because of his high blood pressure and high cholesterol and a bad heart, the Woods Head Hospital was willing to take him on as a lifelong patient in return for his estate. It did not even matter what the estate was worth, since his stay there was likely to be very brief. However, what they don't know is he is immortal.
That's exactly right.
Chapter 35. The last chapter.
The last chapter.
Dirk woke up in a hospital after the motorcycle incident. He had a dream where Torag and a green-eyed scythe-bearing giant made their escape to the northeast from Valhalla, where they were unexpectedly accosted and consumed by a newly created immense guilt god, which had finally escaped from what looked suspiciously like an upturned refrigerator on a skip.
Okay.
His nurse was Sally Mills. She was glad to see he finally came to the hospital to get his nose tended to.
Mm-hmm. Right. She gave him the pizza that Kate finally got delivered to the hospital.
Yes. And to give it to her if he ever sees her.
Exactly. So he gets a cold pizza for his trouble.
Right. She also talked about him stealing her book that she does not know why she buys. And she heard that this author has made a deal with the devil or something.
Right.
And she also said that she knows a guy who was hired to smuggle all the chickens out of the hotel after they were brought in. So this guy has chickens brought in and a guy smuggle them out just to have this mystique.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Reminds us of Ozzy Osbourne, right?
Yes. So she gave Dirk the newspaper and he read his horoscopes. The one said that today is a day to enjoy home comforts. He thought about his new refrigerator and decided to worry about the eagle later. He then turned to the front page to see if there was any interesting news.
Thus ends the book.
Yes.
Where he's about to discover that his home has been completely destroyed.
Right. Along with his new refrigerator.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, so much to unpack. I mean, I can't believe you were able to go through all that and come through it. And unlike his other books, this one is very plot heavy. But like his other books, it seems to come to a screeching halt at the end.
Yes, it's sometimes there are TV shows that draw out this whole long thing, and in the last 1 minute of the episode, everything is solved. And you're like, well, how did that happen? And that's kind of what happens here. I think he started thinking his book was getting too long and just decided to finish it. Or they did the, it's over when you finish this chapter type of thing to him again.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So here's my concern. I know we're not going to do a review of this particular book like we would, but the one thing that bothers me about this book is that obviously Odin goes to the executive, the marketing executive, and essentially begins this contract. Okay.
Right.
But the hot potato is all the little clauses that are added into it by Torag.
Right.
But it's described in the book as a receipt for things that took place, where it's the items described on the left and the column on the right, or the amount of monies or compensation that's right. owed. So I'm really sort of confused by what did they get from this hot potato. I mean, it's supposed to be a receipt from Torag. So Torag will add their names and give them things, or what's your impression of that?
Like you said, there's a lot to unpack. One, I think a receipt is also a bill. Like it's right. To me, the receipt is what you get when you've paid.
Right.
Afterwards, but your receipt could also be the bill that you're being presented. Right.
Right, because remember the contract is actually hidden in Norway. So the only reference we have to the actual contract is when Thor tears it up and nullifies it. And then that of course makes Torag and his compatriot, the green-eyed monster, persona non grata. So everything that happens past the contract is on this quote unquote hot potato. I don't I'm missing something. Are you not confused? Because I am confused.
I well, I don't want to say I am not confused. I am so confused that the hope of ever figuring it out doesn't exist. Therefore, I'm not confused because I'm not trying to figure it out.
Okay.
Because so this is how I read the story, and this is what doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
They make a contract with Odin, and Odin's going to be provided for, but they're going to be provided for too.
Right.
And then there's all these little clauses which become the hot potato. And so it's you've made a deal with the devil, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And what I don't know is how your obligations can be passed on to somebody else. Like,
exactly.
I have everything that I have, and I don't want to be stuck with this, so I'm going to convince somebody else to sell their soul by signing and taking this hot potato from me. And when they take the hot potato, I still retain everything that I have without the obligation to pay because I've passed it on. Right. And then they pass it on, and they pass it on, and they pass it on. And what I don't understand is how the guy that overheard the conversation that wrote the song Hot Potato got the hot potato.
I know. Except, like you say, I kind of understood your logic, so I'm sort of piecing it together in my mind. I guess you have to think of it more like a codicil to the contract or whatever. And I don't know why they describe it as a bill or, as a receipt, but they do. And I think I can see what you're saying. So maybe it melds a little better in my mind. They get this packet full of papers, which is presented to them by Torag, to the original two folks, and then they get someone else, like you say, to swear their soul to pay for it. And that's when the first signature appears on the outside of this envelope. And then that person gets another person, and then another person, another person, another person, all the way until...
Right. The Draycotts bought everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kept what they want, and they sold the rest off. And passed it on. And it's whoever held it at the end. If it didn't keep getting passed, or if one person held on to it for too long, when the Green Eye guy came, that was it for them. But I don't...
Yeah, it doesn't really fit. Doesn't really work because, should have been collapsing everybody all the way back. Not just the last person in there,
Right,
I don't know.
Well, the other thing, too, is if you take the kids' game Hot Potato, do you remember that?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes.
It's a timer.
Right.
There is a set time that the hot potato is going to go off no matter who's holding it or how long they have held it. So it's not like, don't hold on to this for too long. And the timer doesn't reset every time you pass it. Right.
That part kind of jives because he does know that the time ends at 6:30. But if he knew it, why didn't he get rid of it? If he knew that there was a time limit, why didn't he get rid of it?
Well, actually, I think the time was 7.
6:30, 7 o'clock. Okay. Yep, 7 o'clock.
Dirk was supposed to be there at 6:30 to probably help him. Maybe he was going to sell Dirk the hot potato.
I guess. I mean, that would be the logic that we'd have to look at, or we'd have to assume.
So the guy was trying to pass the hot potato to Dirk, promising all of these expenses and the... So yes, Dirk was talking about all the money that he wanted and all the expenses and all his daily fees. And he readily agreed to all of it, which made Dirk greedy, which made him want this client. So the guy was going to pass the hot potato to Dirk.
Yes, that seems logical, although the hot potato is upstairs in the attic room and he's locked himself inside a basement.
Well, that might have been his presentation. Like if Dirk would have got there at 6:30, he would have then brought him upstairs and explained the gold record and passed him the hot potato. But
Maybe.
it's now,
yeah, I mean, that's all
it's
we
now
know.
6:59, and Dirk's not there. So he runs
Locked himself
downstairs
in.
and barricades himself in the basement.
I guess. Once again, we will never know.
No.
Although that does make sense. I can see that. But I would have thought that the hot potato would have been in his hand for the last second trying to get rid of it, you know?
Give it to the kid.
If he really knew that that's when it was happening, why did he wait so freaking long?
Right. Yeah, he knew the day and time. And like we've already discovered, his fortunes don't disappear when he passes the hot potato along.
Right.
So he could have passed it along long ago.
Right. Well, they almost make it seem like it's not like the original hot potato game where there's one timer. They almost make it seem like each time you pass it on, the timer resets.
Right.
You know, but I don't know. Anyway, the envelope full of papers still kind of puzzled me a little bit. I think we've analyzed it enough to make it understandable for a story. I'm not sure I would consider this one of his best works.
No.
But I did enjoy reading it, and I'm glad I'm done.
Right. Well, I guess this was, and I certainly couldn't, right now off the top of my head, tell you all of them, but the 5 Hitchhikers novels, which are vastly different than this, and the first Dirk Gently novel, to me, had a purpose. He wrote them for a reason. He had a story that he wanted to tell, and the reason seemed not obvious, but there. You kind of got a feeling of what the overall story metaphor was. I don't know why this story exists.
Right.
I don't know what he was trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is it about guilt? Is this whole thing?
Yeah, and that's the other part that I was trying to puzzle out, because I'm not sure why the refrigerator god is a god of guilt. And that's what I was referring to way back at the beginning of the story. He didn't keep it closed because he felt guilty.
No.
You know, he just didn't want to clean it. You know, he didn't want to be the one to clean it. He wanted someone else to clean it for him. And she's not going to clean it either because he's not paying her. So
Right.
She's only doing whatever she can to do whatever she has to do. So that's never going to change. So that whole thing with the little, bit of hair across the seal of the refrigerator to determine who was going to open it first, that's not a guilty thing. I mean, where I guess we're supposed to get the guilt from is from Dirk thinking he's responsible for the death of his client,
who was basically trying to kill him.
Well, yeah, so that doesn't work either. So
he didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, he didn't, and he felt guilty. So they do repeat that over and over again. But I don't get the god of guilt from the refrigerator.
I didn't either. It didn't make sense on how guilt manifested itself that way, because it was like you said, a war of attrition. It was stubbornness.
Right.
They both just seemed to independently decide, I'm not going to be the one to open the refrigerator.
Mm-hmm.
And
I don't know.
Of all of the things it could be, why it was that, I don't know.
Right. Well, we won't know that. All right, so what's next, Jeff?
Well, we promised that the last quarter of the Salmon of Doubt, which is the unfinished Dirk Gently Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Dirk Gently Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy novel, we will do.
Did you just repeat yourself, or did I imagine that?
He kept changing his mind on what that book was going to be. It started out as a Dirk Gently, and then it became a Hitchhiker's, but then he said that the theme better fit Dirk Gently, so he tried going back, and somebody put it all together and edited it into a Dirk Gently novel, or part of a Dirk Gently novel. So next time, we will be talking about The Salmon of Doubt, the Salmon of Doubt.
Great. I'm looking forward to
Unless, of course, there's a bonus episode that gets thrown in before that.
it. I hope there is.
Stay tuned.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we know what's happening next time, I'm going to have to say this is the end.
So when we were talking about Suluensis,
Yeah.
I was doing my research trying to figure out whether this is a Norse character or not.
Right.
And I couldn't. But what I did find out was that, of course, BBC Radio 4 did the Dirk Gently stories, including this Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, and Suluensis was played by Susan Sarandon.
Oh, really? Okay. Susan Sarandon. I honestly thought you were going to say Rula Lenska.
Wouldn't that have been funny? Oh, that would have been awesome. But no, it was Susan Sarandon.
Thank you for listening to this. A new episode is released on the first Thursday of every month. A special thank you goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettyneatidea.buzzsprout.com. While there, you can find links to all of my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can contact us via email at digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook at Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. You can message us on Twitter, or should I say X, at Watches Idea. And our Instagram is Watches Idea Podcast.
This has been a Froods for Thought production.